Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the show. It's your host, Dhaiphong, and I am here with a very special guest, returning guest, Richard Medhurst, a journalist and host of his own program on Rumble now, primarily at Richard Medhurst. But you can also, of course, find him on YouTube. Understand he was recently demonetized for his coverage of Gaza. So we have a lot to get to, a lot to catch up on. Welcome back, Richard. How are you doing today?
Hi, Danny. Thanks for having me, man. It's good to be back.
Good to have you on. Before we get started, everyone, be sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, that notifications bell, all that good stuff. In the video description, you can find all the ways to support me: Patreon, Substack, buy me a coffee, and more. And of course, be sure also to follow me on Rumble and Rockfin by my name, similar to Richard Medhurst, by my name, Dhaiphong. And you can make sure that when the cancellation does come, that there is somewhere to go and that you are continuing to be able to view our work. So with that said, Richard, let's get started. You've been doing some really deep coverage of the Palestine situation, the onslaught committed by Israel. I'm just going to play a few clips now because there has been a recent vote on an immediate humanitarian ceasefire. And surprise, surprise, the United States has rejected it. So here's the vote that Al Jazeera covered.
I will now submit to the vote the draft resolution. Those in favor of the draft resolution in document S/2023/970, raise your hand.
En contra.
Against.
So there you have the United States as a singular country that vetoed the humanitarian ceasefire, which was voted upon because Israel, after the very short-lived truce, has been going on a rampage. But one last clip, Richard, if you don't mind. You posted this actually, and I think it's important to note that not only did the United States vote against this, but here's the disrespect when the envoy, the Palestinian envoy, began speaking. So here we go.
I now resume my role as President of the Council. I now give the floor to the permanent observer of the Observer State of Palestine.
Mr. President, this is the moment of truth. This is a turning point in history, and it is beyond regrettable. It is disastrous that the Security Council was again prevented from rising to this moment.
So we don't have to go further. As you can see, he is playing with this phone, and that is on top of the vote. But Richard, I'm just going to kick it to you there to go wherever you want to go in terms of what's going on right now.
He doesn't even bother listening for 10 seconds. Not even no eye contact, nothing. You know, and remember that the U.S. is you know, a permanent member of the UN Security Council. So it's a 15-member body. It's one of the organs of the United Nations, and 10 of the 15 members rotate. You know, so right now Ecuador has the presidency. It might be someone else next term. And you know, the victors of World War II, so China, Russia, the UK, US, France, they have these permanent seats. Now, I think this was a big mistake, because the whole point of the UN is to have a democracy of nations, to secure world peace, and this undermines it. And it doesn't matter that, you know, you have China and Russia who also have that veto power. I think it shouldn't come into play, because it undermines the whole process, as we've just seen. And I've always said that Israel has 3 seats on the UN Security Council, you know, especially the US, UK, and France. But this is one of the reasons why the Israeli lobby the United States so much, because they want to have a seat for themselves on the UN Security Council. And I should just point something out, because UN Security Council resolutions are legally binding. You have to enforce them. They are legally binding. It's not like some symbolic thing. You have to go through with it. And even what's staggering here is that even if they had passed it, nothing would happen, right? Because the problem with the UN is that they'll say things that are correct, like UN Resolution 242, which was passed by the Security Council, which says Israel has to leave you know, all the territories that it invaded in 1967. So these are the Syrian Golan Heights, the West Bank, East Jerusalem, which is occupying to this day, like as I'm speaking to you, you know, 60 years later. So it refuses to abide by these resolutions, and that's just one of them. There's also in 1980 and 1981 the UN Security Council resolutions that basically declared that Israel's annexation of Jerusalem and the Golan Heights in Syria are illegal. They're null and void. They have no validity. Israel just ignores them and does whatever it wants. So, you know, even if this had passed, Israel would not abide by these resolutions. And I find this hysterical and so funny, because Israel derives its legitimacy from the UN. It says we are a real country and not a colony because we are a UN member state. Okay, well, you have to follow through what the UN tells you then, because you signed up to this organization, and these Security Council resolutions are legally binding. So when Israel wants, it loves the UN. It always points to the partition plan, which is UNGA 181. And then when it doesn't, you know, when it doesn't suit them, they just ignore the UN, and they call, you know, they have the goal to come in and call the Secretary General anti-Semitic. I mean, and tell him to resign. I mean, this has never happened before. You know, like no one has come in there and told the Secretary General to resign. This is so insulting. And also this act where, you know, one day the ambassador, he brings a brick, and then, you know, he starts wearing these yellow stars that were, you know, from the Holocaust, where they would put them on Jews to identify them and shame them and humiliate them. And he's acting like he's a Holocaust victim. You know, right now, just because the UN member states are calling out Israel's genocide in Gaza. Well, yeah, they're calling it out because it is genocide. It's a Holocaust. You know, people are being burned, decapitated, starved to death. It's horrific. So, you know, just because Israel has some of its citizens that suffered in the Holocaust, or relatives suffered in the Holocaust, that doesn't give it a license to carry out a Holocaust. And you know, the thing is that it's not just that Israel spits on the UN; it's literally murdering the UN workers. I mean, I'm going to remind you that you have over 130 UN workers that have been killed since October 7th. Israel killed them all. Hamas don't kill UN workers. They just don't. That's not a thing. Israel does. It's shelled UN positions in Lebanon, you know, harassed UN in Syria. This is a constant thing. They've been doing this for decades. They just don't care. They really don't care. And they've even, as you know, they even shot at a U.S. ship, the USS Liberty. They attacked the King David Hotel. So Israel has no problem even killing U.S. troops and British troops, and then asking for money and cover in the media from those countries at the same time, which is incredible. So, there are no limits for the Israelis. They will murder anyone, medics, journalists, UN workers, and then even call them Hamas members, which literally means nothing, because even if they were, let's play devil's advocate literally for a second and say that they are, which they're not. That doesn't mean anything. You can't just execute someone because they're in Hamas. Hamas is a political party like any other. That's like saying, well, I can execute anyone who's a member of the Democrats. I mean, this is their logic. So they have no right being in Gaza, which again, they under the UN, under international law, they are considered to be occupying. Remember this, they are legally, Israel is legally considered an occupier in Gaza and in Jerusalem and in the West Bank and in Syria. So any action that you take as a Palestinian or a Syrian against Israel is illegal. You can throw a donut, you can throw an RPG, it doesn't matter. Those troops are illegally occupying your country. You have a right to resist. So the Israelis, they say they left in 2005, but they never left. They've besieged Gaza. There was a year of difference where they besieged Gaza, and they've forced Egypt's hand to help them, of course, which again, no one in Egypt is okay with. It's just you have a few people at the top that play ball because they need US aid, they need food. Egypt has the largest Arab population, so they depend on US aid. So, there's a lot going on here. And it's incredible that Israel is even allowed to be in the UN, because the partition plan, which they love pointing to, it says that if Israel is a country, well, then there has to be a Palestinian state, and also Jerusalem has to be a separate body, or corpus separatum in Latin. Legally means that it doesn't belong to anyone. It would be a special city, because it's special for Jews, for Muslims, for Christians, and so Israel has defied both those conditions. They have stood in the way of a Palestinian state materializing, and they have illegally occupied Jerusalem since '67. So, technically speaking, not just morally but legally, Israel doesn't have the right to be in the UN as long as Palestine isn't a UN member, and as long as Jerusalem is occupied.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the huge errors in history, and of course, the United States had a big role to play in this, was, of course, allowing Israel's, United Nations recognition while there was no equal, if there could be an equal, given that Israel's whole formation is based on the brutalization and oppression of Palestinians, but no equal Palestinian state, no actual two-state solution, which the UN continues to go on and on about, but it really has not found any kind of traction.
Let me just add something, Danny. Sorry to interrupt. I just want to add something about this two-state solution. Like the fact that Palestinians have even entertained the thought of this is already a gesture of goodwill, because who said they have to carve up half their country in the first place? Who said they have to agree with this? So we are already being very generous by even mentioning the partition plan. If somebody comes into your house and says, give me half the house, you're under no obligation to give them the damn house. Okay, so it's been taken by force. And then, making it a UN member state is an afterthought. But you had these Zionist militias, what would be terrorist groups, and were classified in the UK as terrorist groups, like Haganah, the Leahy and Stern gang, which make up the Israeli army today. Literally, they became the Israeli army. They were formed, morphed as one. So these terrorist groups were already, harassing Arabs, killing British officers, killing Jews who were anti-Zionists, like 100 years ago. They were coming from Europe in waves and emigrating there. And so I just want to say, with the two-state solution, that it's already generous for the Palestinians to even consider this. And even then, it's not good enough for the Israelis, right? It's just not good enough. And we know that the Oslo Accords were signed. That's a fact. They were signed. Palestine recognized Israel, and Israel was supposed to help them make a Palestinian state within 5 years. That never happened. So, the Palestinians are under no obligation to sustain an Israeli state, and neither is Syria, and neither is Lebanon, because we should remember that in order for Israel to exist, it occupies 3 countries. Well, I say that because of the Holocaust, they should ask for reparations from the Europeans that murdered them, right? Because Israel calls itself the Jewish state, and they should take those reparations and ask for land from the Europeans. Why should they take it from Arabs? Arabs have nothing to do with this. So, yeah.
Yeah, and many observers, I would say astute observers, have pointed out that this operation or genocide in Gaza is part and parcel of the complete eradication of any kind of Palestinian state whatsoever. It's an attempt to literally erase Palestinians, and the numbers are staggering. I think there's at least official count, 17,000+ killed, half of those children, nearly half of those women, and there's many thousands under rubble, which if we count those up, likely a majority of those will not survive. And that means we have over 20,000. So the numbers are staggering, but it's so interesting to see, Richard, you posted this. Definitely want to play it from John Kirby, of course, the spokesperson of the administration, Biden administration. He had this to say: they're getting really defensive now because on the one hand, they're vetoing humanitarian ceasefires, and on the other hand, they're saying things like this
about the humanitarian situation in Gaza. Name me one more nation, any other nation, that's doing as much as the United States to alleviate the pain and suffering of the people of Gaza. You can't. You just can't. The United States, through President Biden, is leading the effort to get trucks, food, water, medicine, and fuel into the people of Gaza. Wait. Name another nation that's doing as more than the United States to get hostages out or to get people, foreign nationals, out of Gaza. You can't do it. And name another nation that is doing more to urge our Israeli counterparts, to be as cautious and deliberate as they can be in the prosecution of their military operations. You can't. The United States is at the forefront of this. Now,
I mean, why do they
take?
Why are they suffering in the first place? He says the United States is trying to help them, alleviate the suffering of Gaza. They're suffering because of the United States. They're suffering because the United States gives Israel all these weapons. They've given the Israelis 10,000 tons of gear since October 7th. 10,000 tons. I mean, this is like clockwork, 24/7 airlifts, delivering these bunker buster bombs. And by the way, that kind of shows how pathetic they are, because they couldn't crush or defeat or disable a single part of Hamas infrastructure to this day, like 2 months later, with all their military might, which shows how pathetic they are. But I mean, this is really lunacy. It's like the realist. I mean, it's the most dystopian version of like war is peace. This quote from 1984. This is really war is peace in real life. You're seeing that manifested in real life, and it's nuts, because some people turn the TV on, they look at this and they actually believe this horse manure, which is astonishing. And this idea that they're urging the Israelis, you don't have to urge them, just stop giving them bombs until they learn their lesson. And even then, by the way, this is even if you think the Israelis should be in Gaza, which they have no right to be in Gaza in the first place. So the Israelis, they love to boast about how like how technologically superior they are, how technical and surgical they can be, and clinical in their application of military technology and assassinations and so on. And then they go and do this. Well, this only shows you then that they're doing it on purpose, because if they spend all the time boasting about how superior they are to everybody, and I don't mean the chosen people stuff, I mean their military and their Mossad intelligence service, that you can see how they've assassinated people from Hamas, from Hezbollah in Syria and Damascus, in Dubai, all over the place, in Lebanon. And yes, there are often civilian casualties, but not on this scale. And those assassinations were of course illegal, and Israel has no right to do that. But it shows you that when they want to be, they can try to do it quietly, without bringing down a residential block. But the fact that they are bringing down these residential blocks, it just shows you they don't care, and they don't care because Europeans are allowing them to get away with this. So this shows you that they have learned nothing from 100, 200 years ago. They're still colonizers. They support colonialism. They support genocide. They are complicit in genocide, and they are funding and bankrolling what is happening. So no, the United States is not doing anything. It is actually the prime cause. American Zionists are the root cause of people suffering in Gaza.
Yeah, and there's been upwards of, I believe, 100 shipments, the vast majority of them secret. Most of us don't have any idea how the United States or what is going to Israel, how much is going. But we do have leaks such as this. Biden is pushing for $500 million arms sales to Israel, according to Reuters. It says that it would be worth over $500 million. The potential sale would restock Israel's arsenal of 120 millimeter shells, which is used by its main battle tank. So unnamed sources are talking about this. So this seems to contradict the premise that the United States is doing all that it can to help the civilian population. Those weapons are going to ostensibly murder Palestinians.
Yeah, they are. It's funny though. I said what a waste because the Qassam fighters, like, they release videos on a daily basis of them destroying these tanks, so they're not really gonna benefit much from these tin cans. It's really pathetic. Like, the Israelis, they almost never, very, very rarely release combat footage. I think I've seen 2 or 3 clips since October 7th, and there's nothing in them. They're like shooting at an empty hallway or something. Whereas Hamas, every single day, they're posting these GoPro videos of them destroying one Israeli tank, another armored vehicle. They take them out by the dozen every day. And the Israelis are trying to hide the number of casualties. They reported 5,000 wounded in Enet or Ynet, which is an Israeli outlet. And then they had to bring it down to 2,000 because Israel have something called a military censor, which is a British law. It's not Israeli. It's still a British colonial law that they apply, just like administrative detention, where the army can censor the entire press corps and just have them retract something or have them put a lid on it. Which again, it's another aspect of how colonial Israel is. It's literally applying British laws from the Mandate times, right, from the emergency regulations, which were created to put down an Arab revolt for independence. So it's just a continuation of this.
Yeah, and I wonder if you could comment on, because on the one hand, Israel is massacring Palestinians, and on the other, I saw a mutual friend, Scott Ritter, replied to a tweet of, and I would play it, but of course, if you play any kind of battlefield scenes on YouTube, you're liable for pretty severe punishment. But to just outline it, it was IDF or IOF soldiers raiding an empty school in Gaza and essentially looking like they were shooting at a wall.
Right.
And Scott had something to say of the sort. Well, if you think these are skilled troops, I'll just let this speak for itself. Talk about the battlefield situation, because as you said earlier, there's this so-called aim, which isn't really the aim at all, but it is the stated aim to destroy Hamas. But on the other hand, that doesn't look like it's going too well. So what? You can kill a lot of people, but it doesn't mean that you're winning a war. What's your take on this?
Yeah, I mean, we should look at the statements the Israelis made, because the defense minister he called Palestinians human animals, and this is not like it's not some random term that he came up with. It's a very, very specific term, and it translates to goyim, right, which is a term that comes from the Talmud. So Talmud is very different from the Israeli stated claim that they're the Jewish state and they follow the Old Testament. This is not the Old Testament. This is a different book. It's a very extremist book, and they have, instead, like the Bible will say, "Thou shalt not kill." The Talmud says, "Rise and kill first," right? And it has this term about human animals, that everybody who is not Jewish is a human animal and should be killed. And so this is what Israel believes in, right? And it's not like this image that they give off about, oh, we are just like the people from the Old Testament returning there. First of all, they don't come from there. They're Ukrainians, they're Eastern Europeans, and they don't follow what the Bible says. So, just to put that issue to bed. And the other thing is that when they're going in there and they're killing all these people, it's because they want to kill all these people, but these are not military objectives. You can't destroy, 28 of the 36 hospitals in Gaza, and then say that this is an achievement. It's not an achievement, because these are just hospitals. There's nothing going on in there. So they lied about these tunnels under Al Shifa Hospital, and then they put out this pathetic propaganda with the lists that show literally nothing except the days of the week in Arabic. But they assume that people in the West, they're ignorant, and they insult your intelligence by just showing you something in Arabic, and they know that there's Islamophobia in the West, so they just use that to spread further lies, thinking no one's going to look at what they're pointing at and translate it, and it's just like Monday, Wednesday, Tuesday, Thursday. So this shows you that they're after the infrastructure of Gaza. They're after the hospitals, the schools, and everybody and anyone who is not a Zionist or in their Zionist interests. And then, of course, militarily, I mean, what is the single objective that Israel has achieved so far? You can't name one, because they said they want to destroy Hamas, but Hamas is still there. Not only is Hamas still functioning, Israel have failed to disable them in any way. As a matter of fact, as I was saying earlier with the footage, every day we have footage of them, humiliating the Israelis. Like it's not just they're taking out a few tanks; they're running up behind them and planting IEDs and then using RPGs and taking out after taking out the trophy system. It's so humiliating. The Israelis, they wanted to sell some of their tanks to Ukraine. They like to pride themselves as like military geniuses. They're pathetic. And one of their main doctrines, Al-Dahiyah doctrine, which is named after a district in Beirut in Lebanon, which Israel flattened in 2006. This was created by the former head of the Israeli army, and he just lost his nephew and his son in Gaza, which, I mean, I can only describe as karma, because there are countless fathers and uncles in Lebanon, in Syria, and Palestine who have lost their nephews and their children because of him. His doctrine is literally just about flattening civilian infrastructure, causing disproportionate loss among civilians. That's it. There's no military objective. So this guy is a war criminal. I mean, to put it mildly, which is an understatement. He is a butcher, and the thing is that the Israelis are suffering not only on the Gaza front, they're suffering in the north because they're having Hezbollah destroy their radar, electronic warfare systems, these towers that they put up, which again, this is another occupation in Shebaa Farms. And they've basically caused the Israelis to become blind up there. And because the Israelis are so afraid that Hezbollah is going to humiliate them like in 2006, they have evacuated 70,000 Israeli settlers. Think about this. You've had these people that have come from all over the world thinking they're going to go to Palestine or Lebanon and or Syria and live there like it's a summer beach house or something. And now they're getting a taste of their own medicine. They're the ones that have to evacuate and leave their homes. And even then, it's not really the same, because Gazans have to sleep in the rain and in the cold outside, and Israelis are just being put in hotels. So you can't compare that, but it's a tiny bit of their own medicine, and it shows you how afraid the Israelis are. They've had to basically stretch their forces thin because of Hezbollah and send them up north. Then you have to remember that the Israelis are also being hit from the Golan Heights from Syria. They're also being hit in the Red Sea. So there's this very tiny strait, the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, that is one of the most important shipping lanes in the world, because it brings you into the Red Sea. And, I mean, there are literally tens of thousands of fuel ships that pass through here. A lot of Chinese merchandise coming through here into Europe, into the West, because it doesn't even make sense to go around Africa. The whole point of the Suez Canal was that you cut shipping times and costs. But to get to the Suez Canal from the east, you have to go through the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, which is Yemen's turf. And so the Israelis, they've had multiple ships, diverting course, being hit, catching fire, or being straight up seized, like Galaxy Leader, which was the first one. And just today, the Yemeni said they don't care what nationality the ship is, what flag it's flying, what the people on board, what nationality they are. If this ship is delivering anything to the Israelis or benefiting them in any way, they're going to seize it and stop it, as long as Israel is bombing Gaza and preventing aid from coming in. So you have multiple fronts of warfare that are really bad for the Israelis. They're really being humiliated, and they never talk about this. I mean, just think about this: that Israel is being hit by the Yemenis, by the Lebanese, and they never ever bring this up because it's so humiliating. The other thing is that in Iraq and Syria, the U.S. have bases there that are being hit almost on a daily basis by the resistance in Iraq and in Syria. So the Hashr al-Shabi, which is PMU, Popular Mobilization Units, and of course you have other resistance groups that work with the Syrian government. So this also negatively impacts the United States and Israel, because the United States is the one that is supplying Israel. So they're going to get, as long as they help Israel to carry out this genocide, they're going to get punished in Iraq and Syria. And honestly, I mean, those bases have no business being there anyway. They're illegal and they're stealing oil. In Iraq, after the U.S. assassinated Soleimani, they said, get the hell out of the country. They voted on this in the parliament. And this is funny, because the whole point that they claimed that they said was the basis of invading Iraq. It wasn't just like weapons of mass destruction. They said they want to bring democracy. Okay, Iraq has a democracy now. They voted on kicking out the Americans, and they don't listen. They don't care. So that's a funny thing. But these occupation forces, whether they're in Lebanon, whether they're in Syria, whether they're in Palestine or Iraq, they're being hit, and they are bleeding, and they are taking damage. And I should add one thing, that Israel has a base in Eritrea on this island called Dahlak, and the Yemenis hit that too. And Yemen is sending cruise missiles and drones, which no one would have even thought of. I mean, 2 years ago when they hit the United Arab Emirates, which was very far away, we're talking 1,000, 2,000 kilometers. That was already impressive. And this is one of the reasons why the GCC cut the war on Yemen, because they saw that, oh, this is coming to our doorstep now, and we can't defeat them. So another impressive feat the Yemenis executed was to fire these cruise missiles and drones all the way at Eilat, which is this port city in occupied Palestine. So many surprises that they didn't expect. And this is not just a war that's happening in Gaza. It's a war that's taking place on multiple fronts, and that is really bad news for the Israelis and Americans, because they cannot sustain it.
Yeah, and even Lloyd Austin had to admit that what Israel is doing to Palestinians could amount to very easily a quote-unquote strategic defeat, meaning that the more that you pound Palestinians into the ground, the more that there will be resistance to it that, as you said, Richard, cannot be cannot be approached, cannot be confronted in the manner that Israel would like, and of course the United States. And how have you, given that this is a regional war, it almost always is when there's an escalation from Israel, but this, of course, the scale of this so-called operation, this brutal war, is just many times over what generally happens, the amount of suffering that Israel causes.
Right.
I mean, I'm sure you've been thinking a lot about this. How do you put it all together, especially the U.S.'s role? Because now I believe Blinken is speaking with Arab leaders and so-called Islamic council leaders now. And also you have this other side of, you had Putin's snap visit to the Middle East. You have Russia and China as the few major countries, the big nations around the world, the most influential countries standing for a Palestinian state, for an actual ceasefire. Right. How do you feel like this will end if this truly is a regional conflict? Do you see it escalating, or do you feel, some are saying that the United States may be giving Israel only about a month or less before the new year? What's your take?
Well, I don't know how long it's going to go on, but we should remember that this is, it's been going on since 1948, and this is just another episode in that. So, many people in Gaza, most of them actually don't come from Gaza. They come from other parts of Palestine, and they lost their homes in the Nakba in 1948. So, it's been, and if you look at the Intifada, you look at all these wars, they're all part of one war, which is the war of European colonizers against Palestinians. And it's not just Palestine, by the way. We should remember that this is, as you said, it's a regional war. And as I was explaining, there are multiple fronts now. But if you just look at the pattern, it's European colonizers that come to the Middle East and butcher people. And they've been doing it in Libya. They've done it in Yemen. They've done it in Syria. Now, of course, Pakistan and Afghanistan is further away, but nevertheless, they wanted to create one axe that goes all the way from Afghanistan to Palestine. And so, the majority of these countries are Arab countries, and they're majoritarily Muslims. So you have a pattern of Europeans, whether they're British, whether they're Israelis, whether they're Americans, they're still Europeans predominantly, coming to the Middle East to a region that doesn't belong to them, and murdering people for decades and decades and decades. And this is, if you don't even count the centuries of colonialism. This is, this is scandalous. It's beyond scandalous, because they think that they can run the whole world, and colonialism never died. Remember that this plan they have of defeating Hamas is a cover story. What they're really trying to do in Gaza is they want to turn Gaza into rubble so that they can remold it and reshape it to their liking. And there was a document that was released from the Israeli Ministry of Intelligence about a month ago, where they were talking about plans of what to do with people in Gaza. And they thought they can just kick them out into the Sinai Desert in Egypt, right? So once again, it's refugees becoming refugees a second or third time. And they want to do this because they have multiple things in mind. There's a lot of gas in the Mediterranean Sea, on the Mediterranean coast. So in what is called the Levantine Basin. So this is Syria, Palestine, Lebanon. And you've seen systematically how Israel have tried to steal this gas. They bombed the Latakia port in Syria, which disables any maritime activity or gas exploration. The Beirut port mysteriously exploded in 2020. So those are two ports out of action. Gaza itself, which is on the sea, you can't even fish, let alone explore gas. And so the only working port that is left is Haifa, which is in occupied Palestine. It's controlled by the Israelis. And when the Ukraine war started, the Israelis partnered up with the European Union. They literally signed a gas deal. And so the head of the EU Commission, she went to Israel, and she said that you guys are going to help us replace the Russian gas that's been cut off. So you see the ports have been disabled, the Lebanese, Palestinian, and Syrian ports. They sanctioned Russian gas. They sanctioned Iran, blocking it from selling its gas and oil. And the only savior is Israel now. But Israel doesn't have any gas. It has to steal it. So that's why they're kicking people out of Gaza. And that's why Israel sent this FPSO, which is a giant gas extraction vessel, to just straight out steal the gas, like in broad daylight. And they only backed off once Hezbollah threatened to fire at them. And then the US had to mediate a deal. And so you see how Israel and the United States together, they have made sure that Russia, Iran, and the Arabs cannot export any gas or oil to Europe. And then they propose themselves as the saviors with liquefied natural gas, and Israel stealing gas from the Levantine Basin. So this is why they're doing this to Gaza. And another reason is, of course, the Ben Gurion Canal in the 1960s. After the Egyptian president Nasser, he dared to nationalize his own Suez Canal, his own territory. As you know, Britain, France, and Israel attacked Egypt in 1956, and so this had the Europeans and the Westerners worried afterwards. They said, well, we need our own canal. How do we do this? And so the Israelis and Americans, they drew up a secret plan. This was classified till the 1990s, but they did it in 1963. And they talked about how they could put 520 nuclear bombs in the Negev desert to basically, carve out a new canal. And they named it after the first Israeli Prime Minister Ben Gurion, so Ben Gurion Canal. Now this would obviously undermine the whole purpose of the Suez Canal and its role or status as a crown jewel of maritime trade and world trade. So that would crash Egypt's economy. And then, of course, it would once again prioritize the Israelis. So not only would they be gas exporters, but they would also have their own maritime trade route. But where does the Ben Gurion Canal go? It passes by Gaza. So if you either have it going right next to Gaza, in which case you still need to crush Palestinians, or you have it going through Gaza, which is cheaper, and which is and you still need to crush Palestinians. So the Israelis are racist. Zionism is racist. It's a settler colonial ideology, but they also have economic incentives. They also have these huge economic plans in mind. And this is not a joke, because when they see BRICS, and the Belt and Road Initiative, they feel threatened, as we know. And this is why Netanyahu went to the United Nations a month ago, and he held up this map, and he declared his plan for a new Middle East. And he's literally drawing with a marker a rival to the Silk Road. So they feel threatened by this. So this suits both the Israelis and the Americans. They get to sell their own products by stealing gas. They get to take over more Palestinian territory. They crush any resistance. And then, of course, they get to undermine China, Russia, and Iran. So, these are very important things to point out. And I would also add that Iran and Iraq, they signed a railway deal 2 months ago. The Syrian president, as you and I were talking about back then, visited China and signed a strategic partnership. These things are like putting pieces in a puzzle. They all benefit not just Syria, Iran, and Iraq, but everybody who signed up to the Belt and Road Initiative, because it gives now extended railway access and also maritime access, because Syria is on the Mediterranean Sea. So they felt threatened by these things and wanted to sabotage them. And Gaza is the manifestation of that. So it's one of the options that they're using and exploring in order to, as I said, take over more territory and benefit themselves economically. And it's honestly disgusting. It doesn't make it any better. It actually makes it worse and even more disgusting.
Yeah, and that's such an important point about Israel's economic interests and the economic interests of all of those that back Israel, because oftentimes, yeah, Zionism in Israel as a whole is seen as, you know, this just extremely hateful state, which it is. It is. I mean, it is monstrous in what it is doing, but devoid of context, so we don't understand exactly why it's doing what it is doing. I think the economic interests, it's spelled out too, and maybe you can comment this: the goal for a greater Israel. This has been many decades in the making, and appears to lie at the root of why Israel doesn't just have an antagonism, a deep-seated hatred and warmongering lust against Palestinians, but it truly is bigger than even that. It is about expansion further and further into surrounding territories, which includes surrounding nations, Lebanon, Syria, Egypt. It would go on and on. So could you comment on that?
Yeah. So I mean, this greater Israel thing is, as you said, it's about land grabs. I mean, Israel in its current size is already, it goes against international law. It goes against human rights. It goes against the UN Charter, the Geneva Convention. But you can see that they're trying to take more and more land. This is the whole reason why, even if they passed this UN Security Council resolution yesterday, Israel would just ignore it, as it's ignored the calls for it to, the legal mandates for it to leave the Golan Heights, and of course the West Bank, and Jerusalem. And so, I mean, the whole concept of a greater Israel, it's based on this notion that, the Israelis are people that originally lived there. And I mean, this is psychotic. How can anyone prove where their ancestors were 3,000 years ago? Not one person on earth can prove this. I mean, this is like, if I went, for example, to Brittany in northern France, and I told somebody, get out of your house because my ancestors invaded England with William the Conqueror, and this used to be my house 1,000 years ago. You have to give it to me or I'll shoot you. They would lock me up and deport me, or I'd be sent to prison for doing that. But when Israelis do that, this is normal. Once again, these are Eastern Europeans. And even if some of them, because the Israelis like to say, they think that by saying this, they show that they're inclusive, that 20% of Israelis are Arab citizens. Well, Israelis are a minority. So even then, this figure is so tiny. It shows you once again that a tiny minority have taken over all of the land. And this was what was wrong with the partition plan. It's that they're giving the majority of Palestinian land to a minority of Jewish refugees from Europe. It shows you that there was a lot of goodwill on the part of Arabs. They took in these refugees who were persecuted in Europe for centuries. They took them in, and then they turned against them by forming these militias, and then seizing the land. And it's ironic because Syria, if you look at what Syria looked like barely 150 years ago, and it looked like this for most of history, Syria included, the border of Syria included Gaza. It went all the way to Egypt. Egypt and Syria used to be one country multiple times throughout history. Saladin, the famous warrior who defeated the Crusaders, he united Egypt and Syria. Egypt and Syria were one country also during the Cold War, and Syria still has that flag to this day from the United Arab Republic. So many times, and the people that carved it up into tinier chunks are the Europeans, and they did that during World War I with the Sykes-Picot Agreement. So this was the French and the British, and they came and they carved Syria up into Lebanon, into Jordan, into Palestine. They defined these borders, and I don't know why Arabs keep these borders and follow, these ridiculous lines that were drawn up by a bunch of white men in London or Paris. And the same thing for Africa. So they've divided and conquered by making countries based on sectarian divisions. And so the whole point of that is to splinter the Arab countries, the African countries, and then better control them that way. And they did the same thing with Yugoslavia. They also, split it into tinier chunks. So, the irony is that Syria should be much, much larger than it currently is, but it's still not enough. And they just keep on taking more land, like the Golan Heights. And the Americans now occupy 1/3 of Syria, and Turkey, which is a NATO member state, is up in the north in Idlib. So, like, they carved up Syria 100 years ago into tiny chunks, and now they're taking 3 more chunks out of it. This is just it's a pattern of Europeans coming into Arabia, into the Middle East, and carving it up into smaller pieces so they can steal resources. And I'm sorry, but somebody who's from Ukraine or from Australia or England doesn't have any right to go live in Palestine just because they think that they're the chosen ones or whatever. I mean, this is insane. You can't tell me someone from Russia has more of a right to live in Palestine than a Palestinian who's been there for centuries. This is why Zionism is based on supremacy. It's this notion that we are the chosen ones. We can do whatever we want. International law doesn't apply to us. And then they have the irony is that they call Hamas religious extremists. I mean, no one is more of a religious extremist than the Israelis. And if you look at how they are, how Zionism is, it's no different from ISIS or the Crusaders. It's people that are religious extremists who claim the same piece of land, and they claim that they are the pure ones. They get to decide who's a real Christian or a real Muslim or a real Jew. And then if you stand in their way, they kill you brutally. So Israel is no different from ISIS, and we can see that even in the last days, how they were stripping people. And I'm trying because of the YouTube filter. I think you saw the photos that I'm talking about in Gaza, what they did, this really degrading treatment. It's reminiscent of that. So, people need to get this idea of, because you have in America and in the West, this idea of Christian Zionism. There's nothing Christian about Zionism. Christians in the Middle East reject Israel. They are victims of Israel. Israel persecutes Christians and kills Christians, just like it kills Arab Muslims and Arab Jews. So you need to look at the conflict as not, it's Jews versus Muslims. No, it's European colonizers versus Arab Muslims, Christians, and Jews. That is the reality. And I was watching just the other day how the Israelis, when they came in 1948 and created Israel, they kicked out Palestinians from their village, Christian village, and now it's a park for some Israeli settlement. A park. I mean, it's so dehumanizing and degrading. And remember that originally the Palestinian resistance was actually run by Christians like George Habash. They pioneered, armed resistance that you see. And at other times it was secular, and now it happens to be Muslim or Islamic. But it's always popular. It's always supported by the majority of Palestinians because they are all living under occupation, and it's supported by the majority of Arabs. And so, this plan of making a greater Israel, it's really just a European colonial project. It has no validity. It has no basis. And the Israelis claiming that they are natives to Palestine, they're Europeans. They're Ashkenazi. They're not even Semites. So they are actually the real anti-Semites because you see them now on a daily basis killing Palestinians who are Semites.
Yeah. And those images that you speak of, and also the just outright taking over of Palestinian land, property, all of that is likely to happen again. Now we're hearing that the United Nations, their aid efforts are completely hampered because now Israel, of course, is fighting in the so-called South. I don't really understand, in a very narrow and a pretty densely packed strip how you can really even measure north and south. But now that Palestinian people have been pushed so far down, the ones that have been fortunate enough to avoid the the bombings, they are now under assault, and
It's never enough for
the
Israelis.
UN
It's
can't.
never enough.
Yes, the UN can't even, whatever small amounts they were trying to push through in terms of aid, they can't even get there. They can't even get in because Israel won't let them.
It's funny because they were saying in the beginning that they've created a corridor for Palestinians to leave. I'm sorry, but this is like the Nazis, kicking people out of their homes and saying, "Here's a safe route for you to leave." It's not an evacuation. It's you're forcing them out of their homes and telling them, if you stay, we'll bomb you. And oh, by the way, if you move south, we'll still bomb you, because that's what happened. Even at the beginning of this corridor, which was on Salah ad-Din Road, again, Saladin, they were shooting people on that road. And these are people who complied with Israel. They shut their mouths. They did what the Israelis want. They accepted to be kicked out of their homes, and they still get murdered. And then now, a few weeks later, as you said, after they pushed the majority of them south, they're bombing the south. So now that's the center, the objective of their bombing campaign. So it's never enough with Israelis. It's no matter what you do, you can still get beaten, arrested, killed, you lose your home. And the irony is that when people refuse to leave their homes, they're saying, well, that makes you a human shield for Hamas. How does being in your living room, automatically mean you're a human shield, and also a human shield for Hamas? This is their deranged logic. It's like a bully holding up your arm and punching you, and then saying, "Why are you punching yourself?" This is what Israel is doing. It's killing Palestinians and then victim blaming on top of it. So it's never enough for them, and it's like a toothpaste tactic. They keep squeezing Palestinians more and more southward. And remember, most Palestinians in Gaza are children. There's 2.1 million Palestinians in Gaza, and 1.8 million of the 2.1 million have been displaced. So the absolute majority are they're once again refugees after having already become refugees because Israel stole their homes in 48 or afterwards. So it's so disgusting on multiple levels. It's like you have multiple levels of criminality, in every jurisdiction imaginable. Even if you apply the Israelis' own law, which would never happen because it's an apartheid and Palestinians don't get equal treatment. Even in the Israeli jurisdiction, this would be illegal, but they do it anyway because they don't consider Palestinians to be human beings. They literally said this themselves. They call them human animals. Then you look at international law. There's no room where you can reason with Zionists. Even if you accept Israel, they still kill you and take more and more land. And what has happened since the Oslo Accords? They just build more and more settlements. So you can't win with the Israelis. And unfortunately, this means that what the Americans, what the Europeans, what the Israelis are telling the world is that you have to resist with armed struggle. Not because you want to. No one wants to. People just want to stay alive. They just want to live. But you try diplomacy. They violate the agreements. And you can look at this. Even in the Iran nuclear deal. So whether it's the Americans or Israelis, it's a tradition. Or with the 2+4 negotiations, when they told the Russians we won't expand NATO, they always lie and then screw you. So this is very sad because the world was supposed to be better after World War II with the UN. You're supposed to have more diplomacy. You're supposed to have rules in place so that people like these.
Oh no, we might have lost Richard. He's frozen. Hopefully he will come back or have to exit. Richard, if you can hear me, you did end up freezing. I'm not sure why that happened, but I can see it on the other screen too, not just StreamYard. So sorry about that, Richard. If you can head back in, please do. I really enjoyed actually that toothpaste tube metaphor. Oh, there he is. He is coming back. I'm going to kick this one from the studio and enter back Richard. Hey, I don't know what happened there.
I can hear you the whole time.
Oh, good. All right, continue.
Well, yeah. I was just saying that it's really the most horrific crime we've ever seen, which is truly saying something, because I thought Iraq was, I correctly thought that Iraq was like the worst atrocity of the 21st century because it was like a domino. They planted these like seeds of Islamophobia in people's minds. They occupied Iraq. They ransacked the museums. They stole so much invaluable history. They were building bases on top of the ancient city of Babylon, which is like, this is a level of ignorance that I can't even articulate. They were making sandbags out of the ancient city of Babylon, like taking, just pieces of the wall. I mean, and then they murdered 1 million people they caused what they call a sectarian war, which is again like this typical Western tactic. You go invade someone's country, and then when people kill themselves, you say, "Oh, it's just a sectarian thing. I had nothing to do with it." And then ISIS came, and then ISIS spilled over into Syria and and other countries, and it's still occupied to this day. But even even as bad as that is, they have managed to surpass that with what is happening in Gaza, which is really, really saying something, because these crimes are not new. Like every single thing you're seeing in Gaza, they did it already in Syria, they did it to Lebanon, they did it to Libya, but it's so concentrated. It is it is on such a scale. It's difficult to explain why this happens. I think the root cause is again the same. It's this racial supremacy. This idea that they're not human beings. We are above the law and we can do whatever we like. Israel already, as I said, legally speaking, it has no right to be a UN member state as long as there's no Palestine. And again, that's being generous, because who said Palestinians have to give their land? But now they have really shown that they have no place in any so-called international community or the UN. I mean, they're walking in the building and then basically spitting on the institution by murdering its workers and telling the UN Secretary General to resign. Yeah. It's like they just want to beat everybody into obedience, And this is the key: never apologize to Zionists, never ever 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 give in to Zionists, never ever show weakness or accept their bullshit for 1 second. Sorry for cussing, but it needed to be said.
Yeah, no worries. I mean, earlier when you talked about the toothpaste tube, I thought about that time. We've all been there where you just can't get that toothpaste out from the bottom. And that's where Palestinians in Gaza are right now. They're
not going to go anywhere. They're not going anywhere. Palestinians refuse to leave because they know that whether they go or they leave, they're going to lose. But it's going to be even worse if they leave, because refugees have a right to return legally. So 6 million Palestinians have the right to return to Palestine. This is it's a right that you keep forever. It's inviolable. So Palestinians, even if they left, technically they should always be able to return. But because we know that Israel doesn't abide by anything the UN or the Geneva Convention say, their right is at risk. So if they leave, they will lose their homes. They will probably never see Palestine again if they're put up in the Sinai desert. And I think it's so disgusting and arrogant to say, well, you guys should go and live in the desert, and we will pay the Egyptians by wiping their national debt. Why don't you go live in the desert if you like it so much? Why don't you put them in the Negev desert? Why does it have to be the Sinai desert outside Palestine? Why don't you put them in the Negev? This shows you it's ethnic cleansing.
Yep. Yes. Well, maybe we can now talk about some of the other developments around the world. We could probably go on about Palestine forever because that's how grave things are. But I wanted to talk to you about some of recent developments, and maybe we can start with Ukraine. Things are getting quite hairy in Ukraine. It's if there's a crisis of legitimacy with regard to the United States' dominance and hegemony with its approach to Gaza, it is maybe even many more fold becoming a huge problem when it comes to Ukraine. And I wanted to play. So there has, of course, been this spending row, which some see as theater, some see as a legitimate problem. But I think the point is that things aren't going so well for the United States and NATO and Ukraine right now. But I wanted to play what Biden basically had to threaten the people of the United States, essentially, and those who vote in Congress, supposedly at the behest of voters. We all know that's not true, but that's how he's framing it. Here is what Biden had to say, basically threatening U.S. troops into this conflict should there be no more support for Ukraine. So here we go.
If Putin takes Ukraine, he won't stop there. It's important to see the long run here. He's going to keep going. He's made that pretty clear. If Putin attacks a NATO ally, if he keeps going, and then he attacks a NATO ally, where we've committed as a NATO member that we defend every inch of NATO territory, then we'll have something that we don't seek and that we don't have today, American troops fighting Russian troops. American troops fighting Russian troops if he moves into other parts of NATO. Make no mistake, today's vote's going to be long remembered, and history's going to judge harshly those who turn their back on freedom's cause. We can't let Putin win. Say it again.
So,
Yeah.
yeah. So I mean, this idea that arming Ukraine and funding Ukraine is going
Lost.
to lessen the possibility of U.S. troops fighting Russian troops, and then, of course, as you said, has already lost anyway. I'll kick it to you.
Yeah, I mean, they're already fighting Russian troops anyway. Like we know for a fact they sent U.S. Troops there. I don't care what people say. Oh, it was in an advisory capacity. Are they in uniform or not? Are they in the U.S. Army or not? They sent them there to recruit and to run the foreign mercenaries. And this is, of course, just one aspect. You know, CNN filmed the video of a British soldier giving a bomb making class to Ukrainians. So you explain to me how that's how NATO isn't already fighting Russian troops. Explain that to me. You can't, because it's not true. So you know, this is when you are giving Ukrainians weapons to fight Russians. You're killing Russians. If Russia was giving weapons to Mexico, to soldiers in Mexico or Canada to kill Americans, the United States wouldn't hesitate to say, well, Russia's attacking us, right? So they've claimed these things over much less. But Ukraine is lost. It's a lost cause, and I'm sure Putin is thanking Hamas every day for taking the focus away. But it really, if you look at this, you know, you take a step back. This wasn't contingent upon Hamas doing anything. I'm not saying that there was like a connection there. Even other members in the resistance axis, like Hezbollah, had no idea that this was going to happen. That's how well coordinated and planned this you know, operation was on October 7th. So the thing is with Ukraine and with Gaza, we are seeing, despite all this killing, which is horrific, the West is in decline because they are unable to attain or achieve any military objectives. They failed to defeat the Russian military. They failed to bleed Russia economically, and they failed to do the same to Hamas and Palestinians. You know, these are resilient people, and they've had it up to here. They're sick of taking crap from Europeans and Americans and Israelis. They've really had it up to here. So you can't defeat that, you know. And I should also, you know, remind you that Ukraine, 1/3 of Ukraine has been mined. I mean, that is catastrophic. That is really catastrophic. Like this is going to take decades to execute properly, to demine it, if you can even do that. Because if you look at Cambodia, if you look at Laos, Vietnam, like to this minute, you have people losing limbs, children. You know, it's really horrific. And once again, this is another great contribution by the West, by you know, the United States and Australia, blowing people's limbs off even decades after they've supposedly left. So this is very tragic for Ukraine, and this is what we were talking about when we said that sending cluster munitions is a bad idea, because it does the same thing effectively. You have a lot of duds, they don't go off, and then they randomly blow people up later. Could even blow your own soldiers up later with them. Highly ineffective. It's just about making money. And so you know, the territory that Russia have taken in Ukraine, I think it would have been much better had this entire conflict not happened, because it was avoidable. The Russians were saying for decades, just leave us alone, stop expanding NATO. Nobody listened. You know, one administration after the next kept recruiting Eastern European countries. So it's not like other European countries. It's particularly those who used to be part of Russia, part of the Soviet Union. So it's psychologically and you know, culturally, it's already offensive. And then from a military aspect, from a strategic aspect, this is a threat. It's not just offensive, it's a threat. So this was completely avoidable, and diplomats, you know, were angry about this and warning that this might happen before anyone ever heard of Putin, before he even entered politics. So, you know, he is just arguing a logical, rational position that if you come too close to me, I'm going to bite. And unfortunately, the Ukrainians are the ones that suffer the most from this. Because they have been, you know, basically they found themselves in a typical position that they've trusted the United States to help them, and they get screwed. This is, you know, a trend you can see several times throughout history. The Kurds, for example, they trusted the United States, and then Trump, you know, withdrew from some positions in Syria, which he should do anyway because it's not his goddamn country. And then he basically opened up he gave Turkey an opening to attack Kurds, which we know that Turkey thinks that basically the Syrian Democratic Forces and the YPG are affiliates of the PKK, Kurdish Workers' Party, and therefore terrorists. That's another story. But he basically stabbed the Kurds in the back. And then the Kurds jump in bed with the Americans again now, and they're stealing oil. So Saddam Hussein is another example. He basically, he did the United States bidding after the revolution in Iran by attacking Iran with Western weapons, with Western, which is funny because back then they were giving him, freely WMDs, didn't matter. And then later on they hanged him. You look at Gaddafi, he gave Sarkozy, the French president, millions to help elect him. And then Sarkozy stabs him in the back, murders him. So this is a trend that if you trust the West, it will screw you. And I warned that this would happen with Ukraine, that they're going to drop them like a hot potato. And that's exactly what happened. Russia have proven themselves to be very resilient economically and militarily. The positions that they have taken are a result of their defensive positions. Basically, they've set up these rows and rows of dragon's teeth, which are concrete slabs in pyramid shape to stop tanks from driving. Then even if you manage to get past that, you would enter a minefield, which would blow off the tracks and then render you immobile and vulnerable to artillery fire. And then even if you get past that, you would fall into a tank ditch and then repeat over and over. And they've done this to almost every town or strategic town in these territories. So I really don't see any way that Ukraine is getting that land back. And we saw just 2-3 weeks ago that one of the head of the delegation in the peace talks with Russia in Turkey, he said that they had a chance at peace with the Russians, and Boris Johnson, he confirmed the story, right? Because we had heard of it, but this guy is the Ukrainian head of the delegation. He's confirming it. Boris Johnson came down there and told them, do not sign anything with Russia. No peace deal. We will fight the Russians. And well, where's Boris Johnson now? Where's NATO now? They're busy helping Israel, and they dropped Ukraine.
Yeah, and your earlier point, if I can just bring up, there is this, there's a lot of airing out of dirty laundry that's going on in the Western mainstream media. Lots and lots of articles like this one talking about what could have went wrong, what went wrong. Maybe things went a little wrong, but things are pretty right. There's a whole wide range, but all of it amounts to an admission on the part of the collective West, on the part of the United States and its NATO vassals, its European vassals, that things are not going well. And I wanted to just read this to you, and then I'll kick it back to you, Richard. Your point about already fighting Russians, where is it? Here we go. So in this article, basically about all of the failures that U.S. intelligence and Western intelligence are pointing out with regard to Ukraine, when you said, Richard, that they're already fighting Russian troops, I mean, what does this amount to? When you have Mark Milley, head of the chiefs of staffs of the Biden administration, saying this, where he visited special operation troops in Ukraine, working with the Green Berets, the American Green Berets, in the open inspiring them, he said, quote, there should be no Russian who goes to sleep without wondering if they're going to get their throat slit in the middle of the night. You got to get back there and create a campaign behind the lines. So this is just, of course, a little snippet into the barbarity that is how the United States has been aiding Ukraine. But I'll kick it back to you because I know you had some.
Yeah, I mean, this language is astonishing. Like even in the Cold War, U.S. officials never spoke like that, and that's saying something because Henry Kissinger was one of them. So it's not like they were less criminal, but they at least it's like the mob. They will like murder your entire family, but in public they will like kiss you and like say I love you or something. Like at least the pretense it's gone. There's no pretense. There's nothing. It's just like straight up. I want you to slit your throat. And Biden's doing the same thing. He said like Putin is a war criminal. He says Xi Jinping is a dictator. I mean, this is goddamn scandalous. It shows you how pathetic their entire not just diplomatic corps is, but everything. I mean, there's who wants to do business or have relations with countries that speak to you like that? Russia and China are not small fries. They're going to screw you. And not because they want to. It's just they're defending themselves. But you're going to mess around and hurt yourself, and we're seeing that already. I mean, Ukraine was like the catalyst for supercharging the transition into a multipolar world order. Christ, I almost said new world order. Like NWO. That seems to be going down the drain, I hope. But you know, it really shows you how they shot themselves in the foot. And this language is astonishing. And I'm not saying it's better to like not say it and still do it, but it just shows you how things have deteriorated. You know, even now with the ceasefire, before they would put up the pretense of saying, well, we want a ceasefire between Palestinians and Israelis. Now there are no red lines. We are doing everything for Palestinians.
When the onslaught is even worse than mowing the lawn.
Right.
I mean, that's like
Exactly.
that's what's astonishing about it too. It's
Exactly.
worse than mowing the lawn, but
And
no
this is important to point out.
ceasefire.
Yeah, this stuff is important to point out. It really is, because it shows you that there's a transition in how diplomats and politicians conduct themselves in world politics. So it's very, very important to note, especially when the system, the post-World War II system, was established by these people, by Western countries predominantly. So that system coming to an end, I mean, it's a good thing for a lot of people, for most people in the global south, because they have been screwed by these same actors who tell them, oh yeah, you know, you have to have human rights and humility, and you need to be civilized, and you know, we are the white man and we're going to civilize you and with our rules. They don't even abide by any of that. So you know, all the pretenses have gone down the drain. And honestly, if you know, the Russians, they don't even bother responding. Why would you respond when you're winning on the battlefield? So you know, Mark Milley can say what he likes, but militarily he has failed at his job. He is pathetic. I mean, you know, he has lost a war where they have poured you know, unprecedented amounts of money into, and that was to be expected, because this is Russia we're talking about. So you know, he has basically failed at his job, and now he's trying to act tough in the press. You know, that's it. His job is to conduct these things properly, and he failed. So that's why he's upset, and you know, he's basically ranting in the press. But you don't see Putin behaving like that. You know, Russia and China, they're conducting business deals, they're signing strategic partnerships. They know what's up. And you know, I would just add, this is a separate point that I forgot to say earlier, but I just want to kind of throw it in there. We saw Saudi Arabia and China you know, just this week, and I want to say something about these Gulf countries, because they are Arab on the surface. The problem is, though, that they aren't really Arabs. What do I mean by that? Well, a lot of these kingdoms were created by the West. First of all, they were created by Britain, but it's not that; it's the way they conduct themselves. You know, if they were really, you know, if they really cared about Gaza, we would already have seen the Suez Canal being shut. We would have seen oil embargo. And remember, during the Ukraine war, Saudi Arabia and Russia didn't hesitate to cut oil production just to kind of mess with the West. So why wouldn't they do that now to you know, basically to defend Gaza and tell the West that, you know, if you want to kill Palestinians, you're going to pay very, very dearly, because there's no more oil coming and you can't get your ships through the Suez Canal. Even if for one day a week, if they didn't produce oil, this would already have an impact. But they're not doing that. You know, the Russians, they understood that if you're going to put sanctions on us, then we're going to cut the gas to Europe. And then, of course, you know, Nord Stream 2 was blown up by the United States anyway. But Russia responded to this attack. We're not seeing Arab countries respond to this attack, except Syria, except Iraq, and you know, those who are in the resistance axis. But the ones that have all these resources, like Saudi Arabia, like Egypt, they should be doing more, and they're not. And they're trying to play it both ways. They want to be part of BRICS. They want to be part of, and they acceded to BRICS this year. They want to be part of the Belt and Road Initiative. But at the same time, they're also signing up to work with Israel and the U.S. on their rival to the Silk Road, this new Middle East that Netanyahu proposed, this joke of a plan. And they're also, you know, basically colluding. I mean, really, they're complicit in this, because if they're not punishing Israel, if they're not punishing the United States for their crimes in Gaza, then they're complicit. There's no other way to put it.
Yeah, no, that's definitely true. My earlier when you mentioned the name Henry Kissinger, of course, he just died. I just my one hot take on him is, of course, you know, I mean, I don't think it's a hot take anymore. War criminality, millions upon millions of murdered people, and you know,
the only good thing he did was China
around the world. Well, yes, historically, but what was so interesting toward the end of his life is that he, you know, was he was talking about a Cold War being dangerous, and the Biden administration. This is, and I like to say this. This is just where we are at. You have a a nearly 100-year-old war criminal at the time talking about the dangers of a Cold War, and you have the Biden administration plunging into the hottest elements of a Cold War that could lead to a nuclear catastrophe. For as horrible as Kissinger is, there's one thing that Kissinger and people like him do not want. They do not want to be nuclear dust, because all of that murder then goes to a lot of waste. All of that destabilization goes to waste, because, of course, there's a reason why there was shock therapy in Chile. There's a reason why, they supported the bombing of Cambodia and Vietnam. And it's there were huge economic interests, and there was a lot to be won. And I think that's what's so interesting now, is that you have the United States in these forever wars like Ukraine, and there is really nothing to win. Everything is chaos. There's destabilization. Russia is not any weaker than it was before. And I want to just show you, Zelensky's wife, and maybe you can comment on the political situation now for Ukraine. Zelensky's wife, the full interview is actually not even out yet, but the BBC just released this, talking about how Ukraine is in mortal danger without aid, says Olena Zelenska. And basically, this is the quote that is being spread around now. The media, if the world gets tired, they will simply let us die, in reference to the United States and the collective West having trouble opening their pocketbooks of late to Ukraine. Could you talk about the political crisis here from, I guess, maybe the, if we use in your crab dance video, the micro, as AOC would like to say with Zelensky, and then maybe moving on out to,
there's
of course,
the micro and there's the macro. I mean, honestly, like how insensitive can you be? Like, people are being slaughtered in Gaza, and she's like, "Oh, we're gonna die." No, you're not in mortal danger. You're the wife of like Zelensky. You're stinking.
Wasn't she in France, like on like a multi, like
buying jewelry in New York or something?
Tens of thousands of dollars on luxury.
Danny, look. I don't look. Before the war, before it exploded in 2022. It was common in the media, in Western media, to say that Ukraine is the most corrupt country in Europe, right? And we saw actually during this war, once it exploded, that a lot of people had to be fired. Zelensky was removing them from his cabinet. These are cabinet positions. You got people that are running entire organs of his government being removed because of bribery and corruption, because they were siphoning off funds that they were receiving from the West. So while people are like they can't pay their bills. They're freezing their apartments in the West just so they can sustain Ukraine. They're taking that cash and running off with it. And many Ukrainians who basically were against this NATO war, they were calling out these officials how they were going and buying villas in Spain and doing all the stuff with their money. And look, the thing is that Ukraine was never in mortal danger. This could have been solved diplomatically, and they made the mistake of trusting the West. This is really what it comes down to. And I don't know what to say. I mean, because his wife is saying one thing, and the head of his delegation is saying another. The one he sent to the peace talks. There's no mortal danger in Ukraine. The only thing that I would actually say is dangerous is the mining, because the 1/3 of Ukraine being mined is a catastrophe for everybody. This is really, really, really bad. The only solution there is that you have a diplomatic settlement, which again, in the best case scenario, you would have Ukraine change its constitution and say that they're not going to join NATO. Which, by the way, this is one of the reasons that they cited for not signing the peace agreement with Russia. They said that they couldn't change the constitution, which is a rubbish reason, because you can change it if you need to.
Didn't they change it to ban ethnic Russians and Russians from being able to emigrate to Ukraine just recently? I mean, that was just recent.
Yeah, exactly. So when it suits them, it's no problem. They can easily change it. And I want to just say one thing: the Russians, they indicated, or rather, they made a gesture of goodwill, because to show that they're serious about the negotiations, they pulled out of the surrounding positions near Kiev. So they were at the capital, and then they suddenly vanished from there and went all the way back to the border with Ukraine. And then in the Western media, these knuckleheads were saying, "Ha ha! Look, the Russians were defeated." No, they weren't defeated. Nothing happened. They were just there to threaten the Ukrainians into signing a peace accord. Which, don't look at the Russians, because this is a U.S. practice, right? Didn't Nixon say, "Let's bomb them to the negotiating table"? So this is, the Russians are only doing what the Americans have taught them. So. There's no mortal danger here. She will be safe. She's set for life. And Zelensky, when we look at the macro and the micro, Zelensky, I think, is going to be he's going away after this war. They are already in the process, and you've read some of these quotes in the press. They're already in the process of slowly painting him as the reason why Ukraine didn't win. Not all the time, but saying that there were things that they just couldn't contend with, and bit by bit they condition people and program them into just accepting, okay, Ukraine is a lost thing. Zelensky is done. We need to have free and fair elections in Ukraine now, as usual, and then we'll put in another puppet that suits us, and let's move on to the next thing. So we are in that stage now, and you can see them on Morning Joe, how they're saying, like, isn't it time that we give all this money so we can kill children in Gaza instead of Russians? I'm feeling like some children in Gaza. This is the stage that we're at now. So
yeah, and it truly is. There is a shift on the United States, NATO, European Union, the collective West side. It's a shift toward, and I believe soon, because 2024 elections are knocking on the door. I believe soon, while Ukraine will be neglected, and of course Israel's onslaught on Gaza will continue for however long that continues in this extremely brutal form. That will be where the attention shifts, but it really is a temporary pause for, well, what's the next thing? And usually that next aim is directed at Russia and China in some way. And of course, all this honeymoon stuff that the United States is posing with regard to China is, I think just a temporary pause, to use that language that the neocons love using. Pauses. It's just a little bit of a pause, because certainly they can't fight 3 wars, 2 of which would be
don't fight any wars.
Major giants. Yeah,
you don't fight any wars. You don't have to fight any wars. They just. It's funny. Capitalists always talk about how competition is good. It's necessary. It promotes innovation and growth. Fine, but they don't want competition. They want monopoly. So this is the thing with China. It's like China succeeds in the big tech sector. Not allowed. Ban Huawei. Ban them from accessing anything on the Google Play Store. No apps. There's spyware in there, which is rich, coming from the NSA and Google and every single American tech company which works for them. And then of course they put sanctions on them, and if you don't sell your company to an American company, you're banned. This is monopoly. The Americans want monopoly, and China's not a threat. It's just they use this language because they don't know how to say competition. China's competition is fair in every regard. Even in diplomacy, China is better than the U.S. now, because the Americans like to position themselves as the peacemakers. That's gone, man. And even then it was fake with these Oslo Accords. But China's interested in actual diplomacy, and they did that recently, as we saw with Saudi Arabia, Syria, Yemen, Iran. That was really, really, really good. So it's not a threat. It's just China is doing good for itself and others, and the United States can't stand this, because the European mentality is control everybody and everything. And if they don't comply, bomb them, which is, this is beyond ignorant. It's like self-destruction, truly.
Well, I wanted to maybe get to one last topic that gets to what I think has been now a flurry of reports and, of course, developments that indicate what you have already mentioned, and mentioned a lot in your work, Richard, the decline of the United States and the political crisis overall for the entire West. Because, as all of this is going on, as you have, multiple fronts from Gaza to Ukraine that are in some form or capacity posing great difficulties for the United States, you have a situation now where, Joe Biden himself, just the sitting president of the United States, is experiencing record lows in
Yeah.
approval. Now there's reports, I believe now most are saying it's under 40%,
Yeah.
very close to an election season. But that's not all, because the news doesn't get better from there. In Russia, you have Vladimir Putin announcing that he is going to, of course, run again. No shocker there. But he was just in the Middle East. He was just in West Asia talking to the UAE, Saudi Arabia. And then, of course, he was back in Moscow speaking with Iranian President Raisi. And this came as it was announced that 70% of Russian citizens believe that Putin should seek another term or remain in politics. And that comes from the Public Opinion Foundation that said Russian citizens believes, in 70% of them, that Putin should run for another term of office, with another 15% saying the incumbent should either leave his current post and take another position. So people want him in politics no matter where they sit.
Right.
Now, lastly, another report, and this gets into Germany and Europe, you have Olaf Scholz and the current government of Germany. 80% disapprove of the government. And this
What a
comes,
wet rag. He's
there's
a wet
survey that says, at the moment, just 20% of respondents of a survey evaluating his work view it as satisfactory. So all of this is to say, and also you have the EU meeting with China in Beijing for a summit, trying to lecture China on how it should change its relationship with Russia, and of course, work with Europe around Ukraine, and of course, giving all these terms about how Chinese companies are doing nefarious dealings. I mean, I think all of this shows and points to a very bleak picture for the collective. Despite all of this aggression, how do you see it?
I mean, it is so pathetic. Like on so many fronts. Who are they to lecture the Chinese about anything? About anything? Like, forget the historical connotations of white Europeans coming to China. Just the current climate of how inferior European industry is to China. Politics, diplomacy, any field you look at, Europe is going down the drain, and the Chinese are rising up. In what position are Europeans to lecture the Chinese about anything? It should be the other way around, but the problem is that they have manners in China and Russia and the global South, so they don't go around acting like they know everything and should be dictating to others what to do. But when you mention Biden and Scholz with their approval rating, I mean, here's the thing. When it comes to Scholz, I mean, this guy's like really a wet rag. It's the first time that you've had such disapproval ratings for U.S. president and German chancellor. But the picture that I'm always going to keep in mind of those two together is when they were talking about Nord Stream. Like how Biden was standing next to him and basically like saying to the world, and then in explicit terms when he was asked, that he is going to decide what happens with the German-Russian project, which shows you who's in charge. So, for me, I don't know if most people in Germany remember that because there are other factors linked to that low disapproval rating. But that image is burned in my mind forever. It shows you how subservient Europeans are to the United States to this day, even when it runs again, counter to their own interests. And remember that after World War II, it was very important for Germany and Russia to mend ties, right? Because of the Holocaust, because of the Germans invading Russia, killing 27 million Russians. So this was very, very difficult to overcome that. And the solution that they found for most of Europe was that, okay, if there's economic partnership, then there's an incentive not to bomb each other because we would be destroying our own investments and industry. So one of the projects, one of them is Nord Stream, right? And then Nord Stream 2. So it's co-owned by various European countries, but majoritarily Gazprom, 51%. But nevertheless, this Russian-German project, and they just let the Americans destroy it, and they don't say a goddamn word. And the sanctions that of course, so not just the shipment of arms, not just destroying Nord Stream, but the sanctions that were formed by the EU to be imposed on Russia, they hit Europe very, very, very hard. And German industry was destroyed, really destroyed by these sanctions. Because the only reason Germany became, the top economy in Europe and had half of its economy based on exports is because it had cheap gas from Russia. To run all of this industry, you need that cheap gas. And so all across Europe, but particularly in Germany, every industry took a major hit because of these sanctions, and they still haven't recovered. So that's why you see these low approval ratings. And also the foreign minister that the Germans have is another wet rag who I don't even know how she's qualified to speak, let alone to be the foreign minister. She was confronted the other week by she was talking about how she supports feminism, and then somebody confronted her and said, how can you call yourself a feminist when you are supporting the murder of Palestinians, and the majority of them are women and children? So again, this is like typical hypocrisy. Like feminism in Europe doesn't, it doesn't extend to other women who are non-European. But anyway, when it comes to Biden, it's funny because Donald Trump did a lot for Israel. He really gave them huge gifts. So he worked with Sheldon Adelson to spy on Assange. He moved the U.S. embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. He recognized Jerusalem as the Israeli capital, and then the Golan Heights, the Syrian Golan Heights, as Israeli, which again, it goes against international law and what the United States itself agreed to with the previous UN Security Council resolutions, that, this is not Israeli. The Golan Heights, West Bank, Jerusalem do not belong to Israel. Israel has to leave. So he broke with what the law says and what the United States' own position was. But he did it for Israel. He gave them so many gifts, and nevertheless, they threw him. They dropped him. I remember after January 6th, you had AIPAC on Twitter saying that Donald Trump is this and that, and they just basically joined in this whole chorus about, oh my God, he's this is it runs counter to the Constitution. He's trying to overthrow the newly elected president. Blah blah blah. And so they got rid of him. And so, when we look at Joe Biden, who's also doing so much for the Israelis, and who's been a lifelong Zionist, you would think that, okay, well, because of that, and because AIPAC has such huge lobbying power in America, I mean, if you can get the United States to help you, commit genocide, I think it's fair to say you have huge lobbying power. So you would think that maybe he would stay president then because of that. But it doesn't really matter. It doesn't factor into that, because as we saw with Donald Trump, they dropped him, and the next president will also be a raving Zionist anyway. So, it's really a win-win for the Israelis. And then, of course, if you remember 2004, I remember George Bush being reelected. And I was like, wow, for me, that was like, I don't know how old I was, 12, 11, something like that. So I was really kind of shocked, but also it was because remember, this is after Iraq and Afghanistan, and he was hated the world over. So seeing him being reelected, it kind of showed to me when I was a child that, wow, anything is possible in the United States. You can be really, really shit and still win again. Yeah. So I don't know. I really don't know what's going to happen with Biden. But those figures really don't look good. And it just shows you the disconnect, because if the United States is really a democracy like it claims to be, and it uses that to lecture everybody else, then how could the president be doing things that run counter to what the people want? And how could the government be functioning, in a manner that is disconnected from reality? You mentioned before these shipment of arms to the Israelis that Americans and the world don't know about. But how is that possible that we don't know about them? This is for Americans. They're paying taxes, funding this war, and it's being done in their name. Remember that U.S. bases are being attacked as a result of this as well. Which, I mean, they should be attacked anyway because they're there illegally. But there is a lot of pushback, and it's a stain on Europe's name, on Britain's name, on the United States' name to support Israel. And so Americans will be looked at negatively because of that, just like because of the war on terror with Iraq and all these things. And Joe Biden is responsible for that. We shouldn't ever forget that when they say this crap about how Democrats are better than Republicans or somehow less racist. I'm sorry. I mean, this is. I really challenge someone to show me another president that's done more for Israel than Joe Biden, and you can't, because he's always been a Zionist. He even said that if Israel didn't exist, you would have to make an Israel, and it shows you Israel is a U.S. base anyway. So we'll see what happens, but I either way, if he gets elected or reelected or not, you're going to see continuous U.S. support for Zionism, and that's always going to be bad for Americans.
Yeah, definitely. And I think right now at the moment, it really is a legitimacy crisis because you even have prominent neocons like Bill Kristol and David Axelrod calling pretty explicitly for Biden to step aside. They try to keep it surface level in terms of the reasons why they think that's a good idea. Look at these bad polling numbers. Wow, Biden, you're old. If you step aside and let some less maybe immobilized force to come in, then you could be seen as heroic, as someone who sacrificed a lot for the United States, for the good of the United States. But I think even just the uttering of, well, maybe Biden should step aside is a reflection of just how much these wars that Biden has pursued, and of course those who back and control him have caused a similar, not dissimilar to Europe, and it's the United States' fault that Europe is in this. Xi Jinping said, there's the one thing I don't disagree with Xi Jinping. One of the few things is he said to the European Union, the Commission, Ursula and Michelle, he said, Europe isn't anyone's vassal. Well, I wouldn't agree with that, but of course, China is trying to push strategic autonomy and independence onto Europe because they need a little bit of handholding. But in any event, this is where things are.
I guess that's just Chinese diplomacy. It's really being diplomatic. That's what it was.
Very,
he certainly knows what's going on for sure.
Yes. The fact he had to say the word vassal is, I think, a good indication.
It's really like tongue in cheek, which is funny. And I just remember Nikki Haley, who's running for president. I mean, she is like hardcore Zionist. She has like an Israeli flag probably tattooed on her somewhere, but I struggle to see how she could do any more for Israel than Joe Biden. Like, what is she going to give them that Joe Biden is not already giving them? So they can't do anything. He's really like hardcore Zionist. And you have to really, I don't know if this needs explaining, maybe especially to people who are neocons or Republicans. But Israel is a foreign country technically, so you don't have to actually support it and give it billions of dollars. But anyway.
Right. I mean, where is that for? There's a lot of fervor with Marjorie Taylor Greene, and of course, Europe has their similar forces. The AfD in Germany and various political parties that would maybe ascribe to the right, and none of these. Where is the enthusiasm? There's a lot of enthusiasm. Oh, we got to stop Ukraine. We got to stop the Ukraine conflict. Stop the funding, which I don't disagree with, even if it's not on the terms that I would. That I would necessarily ascribe to, but that doesn't matter if it's the correct position. It's correct position. But where is that passion when it comes to the arming of Israel? Actually, people like Marjorie Taylor Greene ended up completely unapologetically supporting Israel. And I don't know if anyone saw Trump's campaign video, but he literally said, because so-called U.S. forces, because as you said, Richard, Israel is literally a colony, and most people who end up occupying Palestine there are foreigners somewhere in Western Europe or the United States. And they, he said something to the effect of, "Oh, one drop of American blood, there will be gallons spilled for the other side." Who was he referencing? He was referencing Palestine. He was referencing Palestinians. So
what you said is correct. It's incredible how they're saying, "Don't fund Ukraine. It's our money. We don't want it." And then they immediately, "Oh, please, Israel, take all our money. We want you to murder Palestinians." They're so enthusiastic when it comes to killing Muslims. They're incredible. And once again, I wouldn't say it's just Muslims, of course, because we're talking about Palestine, right? So a lot of these people on the right consider themselves Christians. They're the most unchristian people on earth. They have nothing to do with Christ. And they happily murder actual Christians in Syria, in Palestine, who are, basically the inheritors, the descendants of Jesus and Jesus' circle, because they are the people of this area. Their support for Zionism is incredible. It's like it's the biggest contradiction of what Jesus taught. And of course, they contradict themselves with this funding of foreign wars, as you correctly pointed out.
Yeah, and it shows that there really is no opposite. I'd say there is no real establishment peace position, even if there are times where they may hearken to when it's politically expedient. Of course, with Ukraine, everything's falling apart. They weren't there in February 2022. They weren't there in February 2023. Now they're here. But here is for those who are seeing this with clear eyes now, with the Israel situation being a real mask off moment. Here is Miss Baerbock, everyone's friend, on the show. So I apologize for exposing all of us to her. But here she is at the so-called COP28 in Dubai, where she is basically calling for she calls for rejection as the US just did at the UN of a ceasefire. Here we go.
Während wir hier über die Klimakrise verhandeln, die meist erstmals geräuschlos und ohne Raketen daherkommt, nichtsdestotrotz umso heftiger zuschlägt, fliegen eben diese Raketen nicht ganz fern von hier im Nahen Osten weiter und Menschen bangen um ihr Leben. Die Menschen in Israel sorgen sich zutiefst um ihre Angehörigen, die weiter von der Hamas als Geiseln festgehalten werden und wo nach wie vor nicht einmal das internationale Komitee des Roten Kreuzes Zugang hat, also man kaum weiß, wie es diesen Menschen eigentlich geht.
Wow.
Und für die Menschen in Gaza, insbesondere die Kinder, ist das Leben einfach nur die Hölle.
Yeah, Palestinians are always at the end of the sentence. They're an afterthought.
Those children. No ceasefire, but those children.
She is disgusting, honestly, because she talks about the Red Cross. The Israelis have a prison in the Negev desert where there are 3,000 people held there, most of them with no charge, no trial. Why doesn't she talk about the Red Cross gaining access to that prison? Why doesn't Israel allow the Red Cross to access Palestinian prisoners? Remember, every single time they were doing the hostage exchange, the Red Cross are always there with Hamas. Hamas don't shoot at ambulances or UN workers or Red Cross workers. They work with them. They respect them. But you never see Palestinian prisoners being released with Red Cross workers standing near to the Israelis, because the Israelis would probably shoot them too. So, what is she talking about? And also the rockets are flying. I don't care if donuts are flying. The point here is that Palestinians have a legal right to resist anyone who comes and invades their land. Israel is illegal, is under international law. It is occupying Gaza. Okay, so it's an illegal occupation. So they can do whatever they want, whatever it takes to kick the Israelis out. Period. It's not a nice situation, but that's what the law says. Again, this it's so funny watching Europeans, who've persecuted Jews for centuries now act like they give a crap. I'll remind you that during the Reconquista, when the Spaniards made the Edict of Alhambra and evicted and expelled all Jews from Spain, where did the Jews go? They sought refuge with the Arabs, who most of them were Muslim. So there's never been a problem with Muslims and Jews. And you've had Arab, Muslims, Christians, Jews living together for thousands of years. The problem is with colonizers. And if the colonizers in Palestine, they're Japanese, or they're Buddhists, or they're Christians, they're going to be fought either way by the resistance. Their religion is irrelevant. No one gives a crap what their religion is. But Joe Biden is a Zionist, and he's not Jewish, but he's still bombing Palestinians, and there will be a response. So, remember during the Holocaust, the French also collaborated with the Nazis happily. You only had 1% of French citizens who actually resisted Nazi occupation, and those are official figures from the French government itself. So 99% of people were either collaborating or complacent and acquiesced to Nazi occupation and Vichy France. And they were, going to houses, taking Jews, putting them in trucks and trains, and sending them to Theresienstadt and other concentration camps. And now the French and the Germans act like, we should, we care about Jews, and just ignore these centuries of persecution. Why can't they find a middle ground? Like, don't kill Palestinians and don't kill Jews or anyone. Don't persecute anyone. Just be normal. They can't. It's like they have to be extremist one way or the other. And once again, committing. So if you've been persecuted because you're Jewish in Europe, that doesn't give you the right to go persecute Arabs and take their land. Go take the land from the Europeans who persecuted you. That's the logical thing to do. Let them give you their land as reparations. Palestinians and Arabs have nothing to do with this.
Yeah, there's always a veneer of innocence, always. Baerbock, we saw there with the, oh my gosh, Israeli persecution is so tragic, despite all the, of course,
Yeah.
footage that we see now of all of the supposedly Klonopin induced hostages, prisoners of war.
Incredible. That was incredible.
Dapping up their captors. So despite all of that, of course, there's a veneer of innocence. Oh, Israel is just always under assault. The Ukraine, we had Zelensky, right? The innocence meter for him was just peak early on in the conflict. He could do no wrong. It didn't matter how much Banderites he supported or how much he betrayed every single campaign promise that he had made, how complicit he was in the massacre of ethnic Russians in the Donbass. And but that's now, of course, the veneer of innocence for him is gone. But there always needs to be an enemy, and there always needs to be the innocent occupier, the innocent warmonger. And I think the mask is off. And maybe we can close with your reaction. It's very funny. I think the mask is off so much with these neocons and with these warmongers, because there's a lot of tongue-in-cheek and humor being spread around. I think this is a good way to end the segment and get your reaction to it, because I think this sums up the relationship between U.S. and Israel very well, but also just how the United States kind of does politics when it is regard to its hegemony and its expansionism. So here we go.
I have done nothing wrong ever in my life.
I know this. And I love you.
I love you too, Daddy. Money, please. My money.
So that's basically
amazing. That's so accurate.
That's basically how it's done.
yeah, that's perfect. Oh, that's really that's so accurate.
Yes. Anyway, Richard, you've taken a lot of time out of your evening tonight. I really appreciate you coming on. Do you anything to plug before I let you go? I have your Rumble in the video description, so people should go follow you there.
Yeah, they as you said in the beginning, they demonetized my YouTube channel, and I mean, it's more than that, because they just deleted videos, like entire videos. For example, the day that October 7th happened, they deleted that. So several days of coverage were deleted, which, again, European free speech or Western free speech. But so I'm on Rumble mostly now, and still doing some things on YouTube when I feel that it's okay to upload. So it's rumble.com/Richard Medhurst, and there's also the Patreon. So patreon.com/Richard Medhurst. If anyone wants to support or subscribe, it would be greatly appreciated. And I appreciate you having me on, Danny. It's really always a pleasure.
Of course. Well, Richard, we'll have to be in touch soon. Have a good night. Keep up all the good work, and we'll be back in touch. Have a good one.
Thank you so much. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye. All right, everybody. That is the show today. Just a few quick announcements, of course. Before you leave here, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notifications bell. All that helps boost streams and also gets you notified, maybe if possible, by YouTube. Also, do consider supporting on this holiday season independent media. You heard Richard's plug there. You can support this particular program here by going to the video description. Yearly memberships on Patreon are the best way. You can find that link in the video description. There's also Substack, YouTube membership, PayPal, Buy Me a Coffee, and more. You can find all those there too. With all that said, though, that is briefly the plug. I was going to do 2 live streams tonight, but I found it to be a bit too much since I've gone 3 days in a row now since returning from a brief hiatus. So I postponed the stream with Ben Norton and Carl Za. We will be coming back on with them December 15th. Before that, December 13th, which will be the next show, we will have Scott Ritter on, friend of the show. and we will get into all these developments and any updates in them together with him. So be sure to save the date. That'll be December 13th, 9 p.m. Eastern Time, Wednesday. Then Friday, December 15th, 9 p.m. Eastern Time, you are going to see me joined by Ben Norton and Carl Zah. So we have quite a bit of great programming to come in the next week, and then we will go from there. So save the date, 9 p.m. Eastern Time on those dates, December 13th, December 15th. Before you leave here, check out the video description and all the ways you can support. I will be back with all of you very soon. Thanks so much for tuning in. And until next time, bye-bye.